Good afternoon, webinar community and LinkedIn Live community. And thank you all for attending our once a month webinar. Glad to have you here. And we are having a guest speaker today, which has a really exciting topic to share with you around penetration testing and the product Pentera. And we hope that you learned something and it sparks your interest and even maybe wanting to have a demo after this. If you can go to the next slide, Justin, I'll go through the introductions. I'll introduce myself. I'm Charles Maddox. I'm with the I4 Group. I'm the founder and principal. And, at the I4 Group, we're a company that focuses on digital transformation, a lot of experience with software development, electronics, and DevSecOps and Agile transformations. And I got a lot of experience in that, as well as the I4 Group as a whole. Deontay, you want to introduce yourself, sir? Our cybersecurity director. You're on mute, sir.
I just want to introduce myself, cybersecurity director. And we're really excited about this product, Pentera. We think a lot of companies need automated pen testing, considering everything that's going on in the landscape of things. And been here for a few years and just happy here to build this practice up, and very excited about what we're doing with our products and services to companies. Thank you.
Thanks. And I'll turn it over to you, Justin, and you could take it away from here.
Great, and thank you folks for having me, and folks on the Zoom. It's really nice to meet you virtually, and hopefully, the next 35-40 minutes you get some value out of this. So Justin Baryza, I run channel enablement here for the Americas. Been at Pentera just coming up on 8.5 months. Prior to that, I spent plenty of time in the hardware and infrastructure cybersecurity space. What I want to talk about a little bit today is our product and platform, Pentera. I'm going to go through, probably 5 or 6 slides just to sort of paint the picture on who we are or what we do. And then I will jump right into the product itself, and we'll walk through a very high level demo. I believe if questions, there's probably a chat or a Q&A feature within Zoom, so don't be shy, throw them in there. I probably won't catch them during the prezo, but I'm happy to obviously spend time towards the end to answer them, or if we require a follow-up, I'm sure I can work with Charles and team to get you the appropriate information. So who is Pentera, right? And really, we are an automated security validation platform, right? So you may hear that term, or you may not, because quite honestly, it's sort of a new realm in the cybersecurity industry. We are offensive security, or red teamers product. And what are we set out to do, right? Our goal at Pentera is to become the authority when it comes to cyber risk validation. Right, and there's an underpinning methodology on how we do that. But if I was to sum it up in one sentence, it would be: we want to give organizations a real life understanding of their risk and exposure by actively acting and emulating a hacker. Right, so we are the attacker in your environment. Right. And that leads to many different aspects or use cases, I guess you could say, on where Pentera provides value in our customers' environment. So obviously, understanding of exposure and risk is one thing, but because we are emulating real life TTPs, we are essentially acting as someone with malicious intent would, right? It allows our customers to really improve their overall security readiness, right? We can validate products, controls, policies in place already. We can obviously understand where there are holes and gaps that need to be addressed and remediated. But it's really a holistic picture on, where from a cybersecurity readiness do I stand? What do I need to do to get better? And then how do I validate that I made the correct changes to decrease my risk and increase my resiliency? So who is Pentera? We're just 7 years young, founded in 2015. We are, just north of 250 employees, fairly well funded. We got a big chunk of Series C earlier this year. Vertical agnostic, right? So as I build out this slide, we have over 600 customers in every vertical size of customer, persona of customer out there. There's not one organization that wouldn't be able to garner some value from the Pentera platform. We are truly global in over 45 companies, and this continues to increase at a rapid pace. right? So what is the problem we solve? And it really boils down to three key pillars, right? I mentioned this, the first one. How do we help an organization be confident of their exposure and risk when it comes to cybersecurity, right? We as security practitioners invest a lot of time, resources, money into products and solutions to really ensure that when the day does come, when something malicious happens in my environment, whether that's something that happens from an internal standpoint, right? Someone gets a hook into my network, it's a disgruntled employee, there's some credential that was left or obtained, right? Or from an external standpoint, right? My web apps, my external assets, etc. When the day does come that one of those gets breached, and we all hope it doesn't, right? But the reality of the situation is it probably will. Are we confident we've done enough to prevent catastrophe, right? Are we confident that the products, the policies, the procedures, all the fun stuff that we built out on a defensive standpoint are going to act and function as desired? And really the only way to ensure that is to test it, right? So Pentera is acting as that, essentially emulating an attacker in your environment prior to the real thing happening, to give the organization a true understanding of where do we stand when the day does come. And that leads to, answering the question of, are our defenses working, right? I mentioned we're all making these investments into all these different products within our security stack. They are intended to perform a certain function, whether that's an EDR, a SIM, web application firewall, SOAR, whatever it may be. They all have their place, right? But when are they set up to work together when the day does come? And how do we understand, right? Again, emulating the attacker, that they're configured correctly, we haven't left any holes, things along those lines. And then lastly, right, I'll argue this is probably the most important aspect of Pentera, is there's many great vulnerability management and assessment platforms out there. And I'm not going to sit here and say that Pentera wants to replace any of those. They have their place in an environment, and that's not what we at Pentera are trying to do, right? We are trying to work in conjunction with our friends in the vulnerability management space, really to make things more efficient, is really what it comes down to. And what do I mean by that, right? So we are all, anyone who spent time in the vulnerability management space working with the different solutions, right, I'm sure would agree with me when I say there's a lot of noise. And what I mean by that is, if I'm an organization, it's not unrealistic for me to have hundreds or even thousands of vulnerabilities in my environment, right? And that's exactly what a vulnerability management assessment platform is there to do. Point out all my vulnerabilities. It allows me to help my patch management procedures. It allows me to help my upgrading, all that types of things, right? But what Pentera is set out to do is really try and be that silver bullet, right? You're sort of red team in a box to say, okay, I have all these vulnerabilities in my environment. Now I want to go through and actually see which ones are actively exploitable, right? Just because I have a vulnerability on my list from my vulnerability assessment management solution does not mean that I don't already have a security control in place to prevent it from being exploited. If I do have something like that in place, right, I would argue that falls lower on the list of remediations, right? It's, yeah, there's a vulnerability present, but no one can, nothing can happen. Nothing malicious can happen. But what about those vulnerabilities in your environment, right, that aren't protected from being exploited, right? That's where Pentera steps in to take it to the next level, right? We will provide an understanding, because remember, we're actively exploiting in an environment. We are running real live attacks. So we're giving you a true real life view into where, from my organizations, from a vulnerability standpoint, do I need to focus my remediation efforts to get the best bang for my buck, essentially, right? So 3 use cases or 3 problems, I guess, we're trying to address. One is understanding just exposure and risk in general, right? 2, allowing you to validate the controls in your security stack that you've already invested in, right? To make sure they're not misconfigured or there's holes that weren't intended to be there. And then 3, really allowing you to put your vulnerability management and assessment platform on steroids, right? To give you a true insight into what do I really need to care about tomorrow and what can wait till next week. So let's talk a little bit about the platform. I have one slide, I'm going to talk to it, and then we'll get into the demo. So the platform itself is built of 2 different aspects. We have what we call Pentera Core. That is a piece of software that sits on-prem in your AD environment, right? Behind the firewall, sort of, I guess you could say like an assumed breach scenario. We do not use agents on endpoints, right? There's no concept of an agent in Pentera. Why? At our core, and I'm going to sound like a broken record, right? We're emulating the attacker. If I'm an attacker and I get into an organization, I don't have the luxury of putting an agent on an endpoint prior to doing that, right? I have to take what the environment gives me. Pentera is that exact same thinking or methodology, right? We are going to be putting in an environment. There are some different controls you can put when you set up the tests, and there are different, tests and things like that, obviously. But we're non-deterministic, right? You could run the same test twice. It would probably do 2 different things, but we're only giving what the environment gives us, all right? On the flip side of that, we have what we call Pentera Surface. That is a SaaS-based product really aimed at an organization's external assets, websites, domains, subdomain services, networks, things along those lines. It's mapped to the OWASP top 10. Again, aimed at giving organizations an understanding of where do I stand from an external exposure if someone was snooping around with malicious intent. Do I have vulnerabilities? We are going to actively try to exploit those just as we would on the internal one. To truly say, yeah, if we have these vulnerabilities, are they exploitable or are they not? I will show you both of these in the coming moments here. So we'll start with core. Figure out the screen here. So Pentera Core, remember, this is an internal, you could call it a pen test, internal validation. Software sits within an environment. Obviously, there's multiple different ways it's can be deployed based on topology. We have predefined tests, and what I mean by that is because we run in organizations' production environments, we don't go in lab environments. We don't want to go in duplicate environments. We want to be in the production environment, right? Why? Emulating an attacker. We need to be where they're going to be to give you a true real-life understanding. Because we are doing that, we have to have a really ultra-high focus on being safe. And what do I mean by that? We are actively exploiting, right? So we have to ensure that we're not going to cause unintended harm in your environment. There's a lot of Q&A and research that goes behind every exploit we add into this product. We have a team of roughly 35 to 40 research engineers, most of them out of the Israeli Defense Forces. Our founder was the former head of that, right? That are going into ensuring that when we design exploits to go into our product, we're not going to cause unintended consequences. As a side effect of that being safe by design, right? We're not allowed to, we can't have the luxury of allowing operators to add their own malware or define their own attack paths, right? Because that would take away some of that assurance we have on whether or not we're going to cause harm. Quite honestly, we don't have any concept of an attack path, right? Or defining an attack path because it doesn't mimic the real life scenario. So I'm just going to go through these really quickly. We have a black box test. This is where almost everyone who's new to Pentera starts. Super simple. We don't authenticate. All we want is Pentera to have an IP in the environment. We'll provide the scopes of the test, whether that's a subnet, 2 subnets, 3 subnets, whatever. We do have some configurability there. Configurability, that's what I was looking for. Things such as a stealthiness level, right? So do I want Pentera to be super noisy when it's going through the discovery and enumeration, right? Use case there is, hey, I want to trigger my IPS. I want to trigger my SIM. If you have a SOC, maybe I want to see if my SOC is sleeping or paying attention, right? Are they alerting the right people? Is my IR plan in place? We can also have Pentera be super stealthy. I don't want to trigger IPS, right? I'm not going to do ping sweeps. I'm not going to do ARP sweeps and things along those lines. Use cases vary, right? It all depends on the end goal of what we're trying to do in the test. We are actively exploiting in the environment, right? So we are going to give you, as an operator of Pentera, the control of, do I want to approve the exploits during the test, or do I want to let Pentera just run, and as they're queued up, exploit them dynamically? Why do we have this in place? Most of the users, of the operators who use Pentera in their environment, are using it to validate their controls, right? Yes, it does. It's obviously very good at understanding what vulnerabilities are there and are we able to exploit them. But part of the natural process of what Pentera does under the hood, right, which mimics a pen tester, an automated pen tester, right, is naturally validating controls along the way. Perfect example. If I do a file-based credential extraction, I want to attempt this on a handful of hosts, I'm probably going to be in parallel checking my EDR solution to say, hey, is it picking up on the DLL file that Pentera is trying to push to the host? So by having the require approvals for exploits, I could be really strategic about what exploits are happening at what timestamp. And then in parallel, I can make sure that I'm checking my controls to ensure that they're doing what they're, or not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Lastly, part of the benefit of having something like Pentera is not to be stuck in these point in time assessments, right? Yes, manual human pen testing is great. You could argue whether this is something that would replace it or not. I would say it's not, right? I think that, again, it can work in conjunction with that. But if having the ability to do and run this test on a cadence, regular cadence, weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever, environments change all the time, right? So I want to be able to retest on a cadence, and then I can start to build a baseline of, hey, is my resilience going up or down? Am I introducing new vulnerabilities or not? So we have the ability to schedule this, obviously, right? We also have a what if or a gray box. If you're familiar with pen testing terms, that is essentially very similar to a black box, but we're giving Pentera a breadcrumb, right? We're going to provide it credentials. It's a what if scenario. A great use case I hear from a lot of our customers is, you know, they're running those phishing education campaigns where they send out a fake phishing email to the organization. If someone clicks on it and that someone had privileged credentials or high privileges in their credentials, they will then take those, run a what if in Pentera, add the credentials, just to say, here's what our blast radius could have been if this was a real life scenario, right? Again, painting the picture before it actually happens. Targeted testing, this is where things start to get really cool. And this is kind of, you know, as folks become more familiar with the Pentera platform, they start obviously to become more strategic with it. Targeting testing is really where we go with that, right? Ransomware emulation. So I can essentially allow Pentera to actively launch a ransomware attack at a set of hosts in my environment. I can select between the different campaigns, right? I can select different variables. Do I want to try and encrypt files on the host? Do I want to try and exfiltrate data? All with the goal, right, of launching a completely benign and safe ransomware attack with all the real life TTPs, right? So it's going to seem as though it's a real life attack against my infrastructure to give me an understanding of where do I stand if it was to really happen, right? What's working, what's not working. And then the last one I'll just touch on before I get into a GUI of a former test is Active Directory password strength assessment. So we can have Pentera sync with my AD environment, ingest all of the credentials and details, run it through our software, and produce a nice, really easy to read 1.5, 2-page report with pie charts and bar graphs and all that fun stuff, right? Really outlining where is my Active Directory password strength, you know, as a baseline. Are there things that are outside the 90-day limit? Are there passwords that are less than the minimum 8 or 9 characters, whatever it may be able to be? Pentera is actively able to attempt to crack passwords, right? So were we able to crack any? How long did it take? What methods did we use, right? Are there weak passwords? Are there reused ones? Just as of 2 months ago, we added elite credentials feed to Pentera, right? For both an internal and an external. On the internal side, core, which is what you're looking at, we're using this for password strength assessment, 80 password strength assessment. So now we can ingest credentials we've detained from whether it's the dark web, public social media sites, whatever, breaches, whatever it may be, and use this, again, to compare against your AD environment and say, hey, you know, you have 12 credentials that are found in the dark web for the right person that wants to buy them that are still active in your Active Directory environment. You may want to change those, right? Obviously, you definitely want to change those. And then we have some other stuff around critical vulnerability scanning, targeted testing, etc. So let's jump into a black box test and start to explore around, and I'll give you an explanation of what you see here. So when we run a black box test, right, obviously we define the time and the scope, how many hosts we want to do and how long we're going to do it. Typically, folks are doing these for anywhere from 6 to 12, you know, no more than 24 hours. They're not letting Pentera run continuously, right? Again, they're using it as that red team in a box, a power tool. So first thing it's going to do is look for the devices and get an understanding of what they are. Go through discovery, enumeration. Are they Windows, workstation, servers, Linux, whatever it may be. And then it's going to, you know, point them out here on the bottom half of the screen. Right? I mentioned the approvals process. This is a view of what that means. So in this specific test, Pentera had queued up 72 possible exploits. And if I do a filter, I could show you all the different ones we found vulnerabilities to in this environment, right? So this drop down changes every time you run Pentera. It's only presenting what it has found in this test run, in this scan, right? So I could be strategic. I mentioned the file-based credential extraction. Maybe I only want to do that, right? In this case, there's just one. I would click the button, I would click approve, and I would go and let it do its thing. I could then in parallel, go check my CrowdStrike Sentinel-1, whatever it may be, and say, hey, is it picking up on the DLL? Is it blocking it? Whatever it may be. Right. Obviously, as an underpinning to everything we do, we have to look for vulnerabilities, right? We need to understand what we can take advantage of before we can take advantage of it. So we are going to list the vulnerabilities we found in the environment. We will rate them on a criticality score. Nothing you see here from these numbers, these 10, 9, 10, 9, 8s, 9s, and all that are based on CVSS scores or any external metric for that matter. Everything is based on what Pentera was able to do in this specific environment, in this specific scan, right? Again, real life. It needs to be real life to the organization. We can't take external metrics and say, this is a 10, you know, because CVSS says it, you need to fix it tomorrow, right? It may not matter. Who cares if it doesn't matter? If we are successful in exploiting a vulnerability or obtaining some sort of information, like a directory file, accessing shared files, capturing credentials over the wire, whatever it may be, we label it as what we call an achievement, right? So an achievement in Pentera is we were successfully able to either obtain some sort of information or exploit a known vulnerability, right? And this is where things get super cool. So we will list all the achievements here. You can see in this specific test, there was 520 of them. Some of them have multiple achievements, 129 on some. As I scroll down into the fives, you can see we're capturing credentials. Pentera's sitting on the wire. As it's going out to understand what the environment is, what point vulnerabilities may be there, it's also trying to sniff traffic, right? Trying to understand, are there legacy Windows or even current Windows protocols that I could take advantage of as a software and fake a host into giving me something they don't want to give, right? We're going to look for directory listings, you know, things such as SCF files, enumerating web services, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Where it gets really cool, for every one of these achievements, we build out what we call an attack map. And I'm going to let this build, excuse me. So an attack map in Pentera is another way to think of this as an exploit kill chain, right? Here's the 10. We were verified domain admin account clear text password. What does that mean? Here's the result: user, password, domain. This can be obfuscated if you wanted it to, right? But that's great. Okay, we pointed out the 10, right? But how? I want to know how I got there. I want to know every single step Pentera took as a software completely dynamically to get that credential, right? So I can work my way down through this attack map. And if I go all the way to the top, you can see The trophy is an achievement, right? The broken shields of vulnerability. So my first achievement or my first successful action or exploit of a vulnerability was this 5.5. And what did we do? We captured credentials over the SMB protocol. Here's the details. Here's a little insight on what this would mean for someone, with an attacker's mindset. But more importantly, I can then go through and understand exactly what happened. So what vulnerabilities did we take advantage of to get these credentials? We forced the host to authenticate to us, right? Perfect. What vulnerabilities? Now we're moving laterally. Think about a pen tester or someone, a hacker. What are they going to do? They obtain credentials. They're going to look around the environment. Can I use these anywhere else? In this case, we performed a relay attack. We don't even need to crack the password. If we can relay the hash, who cares, right? We'll just relay it. In this case, there were some SMB settings that weren't configured appropriately. We were able to relay. Just so happens on that next host, we were able to get into the memory and obtain additional NTLM hashes. And we can point that out right here, exactly what we obtained. Cool. Pentera is going to try and build on that. Can we go further? So Pentera is going to look around and see, are these credentials valid? In this case, that administrator credential is valid on 8 other hosts in the environment, right? Sweet. Can we move on further than that? Just so happens it has remote code execution capabilities on 1 of those 8. Perfect. We're making progress. Now we've found a different host. We've found different credentials that also allow us to execute code on this host. So what are we going to do? We're going to attempt to push down a remote control channel and push down code. In this case, it's a PowerShell script. Why are we doing that? Because we want this host to phone home to Pentera software so we can attempt the next stage in the attack. There's a use case here. There's a validation use case. So as Pentera is going through performing its offensive actions, right? Do we have something in place as an organization that should be picking up on this? Did it alert on PowerShell execution on this host? Maybe it did, maybe it didn't, maybe it shouldn't, maybe it should, right? It's a validation story. We open the command and control session. We push down malware, AKA a DLL file. Do we have controls in place that should prevent this from happening? My AV didn't block the payload. Maybe it did block the payload, right? In this case, it didn't. We got to a different host, or we got to into the memory of this host. There were MTLM hashes stored in clear text, and we were able to find the domain admin, right? So I just walked through, 12 to 14 steps that Pentera did in a matter of, maybe an hour. If this was someone, a human, day and a half, right? That's part of the power of Pentera, efficiency, right? Obviously, we all know the power of automated solutions and software. Why not use it? Couple cool other things cool about the attack map, and I apologize for zooming in and out. Everything we do in Pentera Core is mapped to the MITRE attack framework, right? So every time we perform an action, we are going to map it to the MITRE attack framework. What was the adversary level? What was the technique? Sub-technique parameters? Is it in use by anything else in the wild, right? The goal here is to give an organization of understanding of where they map from a defensive standpoint to the TTPs on the MITRE attack framework, right? We also, if I click on a vulnerability, we will provide insight on the vulnerability and then a remediation recommendation, right? What would I need to do to help remediate this? Pentera is never going to go in and actually remediate things. What our goal is to make it easier on you and your team to make the remediation. So we'll give a very high level here. And then we also build out a remediation wiki. It sits within the Pentera software. So nothing's ever phoning out of your environment and going to a cloud or anything like that. But what the Pentera remediation wiki is essentially a place where, without having to go to Google or go to the textbook or whatever it may be, we're going to give you a deeper dive into what's the vulnerability, how is it taken advantage of, what are some of the ways you may want to remediate in your environment, whether it's using Active Directory group policy or local on the machines, if there's only a few small sort of them. And then lastly, and probably the most important, in my opinion, the most important, how do you then use Pentera to validate that you've addressed the vulnerability, right? So we exposed it. We proved that it's legit by exploiting it. We're showing you how to remediate it. And then we're going to show you how to go back and validate that you've actually fixed the vulnerability and it's no longer there, right? And as you can see, we do this for a handful, quite a few different vulnerabilities as I scroll through here. Naturally, we're going to provide a list of the vulnerabilities in the environment. We also do something that we do very differently is we provide a remediation priority that's not based on severity, right? Our list of remediation vulnerability has nothing to do with the criticality. It's what it allows us to do in the end overall scope of things, right? This 4.7 was the start of that obtaining domain creds. If we wouldn't have captured those creds over the wire way at the top of the attack map, none of that would have ever happened. Right. So this is going to be your number one remediation priority. Right. And this is where things differ very much from like a vulnerability management assessment. We don't care about the severity because we're actively exploiting. We know what matters and what doesn't. Right. So yes, the criticality is great from a context standpoint, but from a remediation standpoint, it's really who cares. Right. What did it allow us to do? And this gave us the keys to the kingdom. We do a MITRE attack map for the entire scope of the environment, color code it so you can get an understanding of where you stand. This is something that you can export after every test into a report, establish a baseline, things along those lines. I'll show you a quick report, just trying to stay conscious of time here. So this is a former report. We have two options. We have a detailed and a executive level. So this is a detailed, but the executive level is basically the first few pages of this. The one thing that I think is really cool about this is because we're running in the environment, the same test time over time, at least that's the goal, right? You're going to scope out a test once, you're going to establish a cadence on when you're going to run it. Over time, we can start to build a resilience score, right? Am I introducing risk or am I remediating risk? And that's what this resilience score essentially does over time. And then it gives you a score, right? You know, executives love this stuff, right? Because they can baseline what they're doing. They can validate their investments in security products, validate all that types of stuff. If I scroll down, we'll do a scorecard. Zoom in a little bit. We will then provide host findings. So if you want to hand this over to inventory team, asset team, whatever it may be, if we're able to access any shared files, credentials and passwords. So what were we able to do? Were we able to compromise accounts? Were any of them privileged? How were we able to do that? If we're able to crack passwords, was it something that was done prior to an exploit, or was it something that was done after we got onto a host and scraped it out of the memory or LSAS or whatever it may be? And then it will obviously go through and list all the different vulnerabilities and achievements, the same thing I just showed you in the GUI. Right. So that's a super quick view of Pentera Core. As Charles said at the end, I'll give you a link if you want to spend more time in this. We're happy to do it. I went through a lot of stuff. What I do want to do now is just pivot over to our external product and show you Surface. It's almost the identically same concept of what we're trying to do in Core. Obviously, how we do it's a little different, and some of the things we do are a little different, but understand the external exposure, right? Understand what's a vulnerability externally, and then give you a way to go in and validate it via actively exploiting it, right? So we're not just going to give you a list that says, hey, you have these 10 vulnerabilities. We're going to tell you we were able to exploit them or these we weren't, right? Again, prioritizing remediation. So what do we see here? Obviously, we'll list our assets. Attractions, I'll come back to that in a second because that's super cool. Vulnerabilities and achievements means the same thing as Core. Vulnerability is an actual vulnerability, and achievement is we validated that it actually exists, right? We may have dropped payload, we may have grabbed credentials, we may have uploaded something, whatever it may be. Our techniques and our methodology is mapped around the OWASP top 10, but we also map it to the MITRE as far as what we're doing, right? And we give you some action types. Asset location, asset inventory, attack surface over time. So is my external surface changing dramatically? DevOps teams love to spin stuff up and not take it down or forget about it. Is it something that's publicly facing? Is it something that shouldn't be publicly facing? Right? Sort of that shadow IT sort of paradigm. And then I can click in and look at different things. So obviously I can look at my different assets, domains, subdomains, IP ranges, services, websites, etc. I mentioned attractions. An attraction in Pentera it's either a potential vulnerability, meaning we can't confirm the vulnerability exists, but more importantly, why I really like attractions, it's things that aren't really considered vulnerabilities, but if not properly configured, right, could be a vulnerability. Things such as an open FTP port, open MySQL port, a website login page, interactive form, right? There are numerous valid business reasons why an organization would have these facing on their external assets, right? But are they configured and secured properly? Do I not allow anonymous to log into my FTP server? You probably shouldn't on the external. Pentera is going to try that, right? Or if I have a login page, right? Can I do some sort of root SQL injection attack or harvest leaked credentials and log into it, right? If I have an interactive web form, can I do a remote or a local file inclusion? Can I abuse the underlying code to take advantage of that form? You know, there's things you can do when you're developing this to prevent that. We're going to check that, right? You may be all perfectly fine and good to go. Great. We just validated it for you, right? And you can see there's a whole bunch of other different stuff here that we talked to. Obviously, we list all the vulnerabilities as well. You know, and these are ones that after we go through and validate and get an achievement, we'll here we do assign a CVSS score. But we can, you know, log for shell, it's found 5 times. Here's the different places it was found. You know, what does it mean, right? And then I can start to hone in on this. So I could say, I want to go to, I don't know, maybe this website here. I want to look and it's going to tell me, okay, here's the details of this specific site. Are there different attractions? In this case, there was a file upload in an interactive form. Great. Are there other vulnerabilities? No, just the log for shell. It's going to give us some insight into that. Remediation as well. Provisioning is very similar to the approval process in core, right? So I have these attractions. I have these vulnerabilities. I want to actively validate if they're a vulnerability or not, right? So I'm going to attempt to do a remote file inclusion. I'm going to attempt to do a SQL injection on my login form. I'm going to attempt to validate log for shell, right? Include this the next time I run a test. I click test now, it comes back. If it's an achievement, it is successful. If there's no achievement, it wasn't successful. So all those things we just provisioned, the only one we validated was log for shell, right? And then I can go in and click into the attack map and it will provide me more detail on exactly what we did, right? Here's the different parameters. Here's the host. Here's the URL. Here was the web request, etc. We have an attack map in Surface, just like we have in Core. As I scroll down, you can see there's point vulnerabilities. There's gathering credentials in AWS from a host, extracting some of these latest vulnerabilities with some of our security vendor friends, all the way to discovering directories, logging. I mentioned that FTP, right? Attraction. We found a port. We tried to log in, and honestly, we were able to do it, right? Probably not a good thing. All the way down to finding databases, enumerating web services, accessing files on web servers, right? So we will do all this from an external standpoint. The thing to remember here is the way the Pentera external platform works, we're not authenticated. We don't have any keys or doors in. Whatever we're doing, anyone with the right intentions or the wrong intentions, I guess you could say, will do the exact same thing or have the exact same capabilities, right? So it's a true real life view into, okay, how exposed am I externally? And then you can see here's all the different, I mentioned the provisioning, right? So I could go through and I could click these and then I just say test now. And this would be validating my vulnerabilities. So that is core and that is Pentera Surface. Charles, I'm right around 2:40 and I don't like to spend the whole hour. I want to leave time for questions. So I'm going to stop there and put up my last slide, just in case anyone has further information or details, and then I'll try, if we did have any questions, I will try and address them now.
Thanks for that, Justin. Any questions from our either LinkedIn Live or live webinar? I'm checking the chats here. While we're waiting for those to come in, Justin, I had a quick question for you. You know, at I4, we have a lot of experience with helping ops teams develop better processes for remediation and their workflow. One thing that came to mind as I was seeing some of the information that you're presenting when you have some of these identified vulnerabilities, what tools are you familiar with that Pentera or that you've seen in any use cases, like connecting with like the Jiras or the ServiceNows to actually complete the workflow and actually fix it?
Yeah. So ServiceNow is probably our most popular.
Okay.
I don't have it in this lab version, but we actually have a button in the attack map where if we find a vulnerability, we can click send to ServiceNow and it will open up a ticket.
Okay.
The other thing, we are coming up with an integration for a company called Torque. I don't know if you've heard of them. They're a security automation sort of automated remediation ticketing kind of platform.
Okay.
And then we also have an integration with Palo Alto's XSOAR product, right? Where we can essentially send them and then it'll create a remediation automated security playbook. You know, integrations are something that we're actively working on, you know, this year and early next year, right? It's kind of been on, quite honestly, up until 22 was on the back burner, but ServiceNow was the big one. And now it's where does it make sense for us to go next, right?
Got it. Makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a question too, just thinking about it. Will it be able to integrate with products such as Tenable from the vulnerability side of it? Would it be able to Pentera work side by side with Tenable in that sense?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and honestly, I get it almost every time I do a demo. From an integration side, I don't know of anything on the plans to physically integrate or digest data out of any of those vulnerability products, right? The reason why is if you kind of think to our sort of whole North Star of acting like an attacker, we don't want to provide Pentera information ahead of time, right? We want it to be, you know, dumb, for lack of better words, right? So if we're providing it vulnerabilities, I guess our product team see it as cheating, right? Where it's kind of already knows what it needs to do. But that being said, we always work alongside of almost every customer who buys Pentera has one of those products, whether it's Tenable, whatever it may be, right?
Right.
And they're not ripping them out, right? They're using us as more of that silver bullet strategic, right? To say, okay, Tenable gives me the 1,000-foot view of my vulnerabilities. I want to use Pentera to give me the 10-foot view of which ones actually matter, right? That I still need Tenable to define my patching schedules and things like that, right? On a broader basis. But maybe I use Pentera to define the ones that I got to have the team stay the weekend to fix, right? Versus wait till next Tuesday.
Right. Okay. Fair enough.
All right. I don't see any questions coming in quite yet. Well, Deontay, did you want to kind of give an overview of just how the I4 group, you know, what are cybersecurity services and offerings and, you know, opportunities to involve Pentera and like the Tenables, how we can, you know, potentially help our clients?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, just give a quick overview. We're a cybersecurity consulting company boutique, and we get involved with vulnerability management, and then bring this new product called Pentera from the pen testing aspect. And then we also get into DOP as well. And then, so we have partnerships with various companies, Tenable, this company Pentera, and ForcePoint, and a few other products as well. And we'd like to maybe be able to sit down and we can meet up with you and talk to you about how we can help come in with a solution like Pentera to help look at your network, your enterprise in a more realistic standpoint. Whereas Tenable only gives you this big overview. This kind of gets into the weeds of it. So, you know, we're really excited about that. We work with enterprise level environments and mid-level environments as well. And then we also bring Agile cybersecurity as part of one of our services that deal with helping use an Agile within your core structure. So a good example from the vulnerability standpoint, you have your infrastructure team, your infosec team. A lot of times some companies are not really having these groups talk to each other like they should. And this is where Agile becomes a good methodology bringing into your company to fill in those gaps, get those sprints and stand on meetings. So you can start getting down to the root of things, which are vulnerability and not having patches not being patched, which that's one of the most critical things going on right now. Things are not being patched on a point where it should be. And so a product like Pentera would definitely help that scenario, and product like Tenable as well too. And so we just want to say that we'd like to talk to you about anything. If anybody see this video, you can definitely reach out to me or Charles, and look at our website, the i4group.com, and we definitely would like to schedule time and a talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Deontay. And as the last slide here shows, there's some contact information for all of us, and even scheduling a demo with Pentera. That would be something that you might want to get involved in as well. And well, Justin, any last words? I think we're probably at our close here.
Just thank you for your time. It was fun talking, and look forward to engaging further.
All right.
Sounds good. Well, thanks everyone. We'll see you guys at the next webinar. Stay tuned. And this video will also be shared to those that were on the invite list, and also to our LinkedIn community at large. So thanks again, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a good day. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.